Shabbat Shalom, family. This week's Torah portion is Kaye Sarah, or the life of Sarah. This can be found in Genesis 23, verses 1 through chapter 25 and 18. The prophets can be found in 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 1 through 31. The Psalms are Psalms 5 through chapter 8. And the New Testament, the new renewed covenant, is found in John chapter 4, 3 through verses 14. And again, this is called the life of Sarah. I wanted to start with the life of Sarah in Genesis chapter 25, because it's interesting to me that Sarah, it's called the life of Sarah, and it's used twice, basically meaning, and Sarah lived. Why is that important? It's very important because it shows that her life was important and still is today. Sarah has an example of not just the way we live by, but we learn by her mistakes that she made and how she overcame them, how God showed his grace upon her life, forgave her, promoted her, and allowed her to live to 120 years. The word live, let's start with Sarah, comes from the Strong's Hebrew number 8283, which means noble woman. So Sarah was a noble woman. It comes from 8282, which means princess, queen, noble lady. That's Sarah. And that's actually the name that God gave her, because her original name, before Yah changed it, was Sarai. So Sarah was made into a queen. She was named a queen. And at that time, she may not have even thought of herself as being a queen or a noble woman or a noble lady, but God viewed her of that, just like that. How do we take that to heart with our own selves? The Bible says that Yeshua is returning with a name that no man knows, that only the Father knows. And that once he returns, he's going to teach his name to us. So that means that it's very possible that you are given a new name, just like Sarah was, that you don't know, that only God knows, only the Father knows. And he's going to write that name on your heart. You are known by him. You have been given life. The word lived, where it says Sarah lived, comes from the Hebrew number 2416, which is hay, which means alive, also means to plant, to water. It's very strong. It's living. It's the appetite of age, lifetime, to be merry. There's so much into this. It said Sarah was all of these. She experienced life. The rabbis say that Sarah, even though she was over 100 years old, she still had the strength of a 20-year-old and the humility of a child at the same time. Whether that's agreeable or not, I would agree that in order to give life, to give birth at the age that she was, she had to have had supernatural strength given by God to work the tents that she did, her household. She had to have had the strength of a young woman. And that's what God can do for you. He can make you, mold you supernatural in a way that defies all logic. Why? Because she was given life. In the first book of Genesis, where God made man, the Bible says that God breathed life into man. He gave his ruach into man. I believe that is the same thing that happened with Sarah. God breathed life into Sarah. And of course, in this first verse alone, it goes on, that same Hebrew word for life is said twice in here. Usually when something repeats itself, especially in the same sentence, it is extremely important for us to pay attention to it. It's something that we should notice. And I can't help but notice that life was given to Sarah and she lived. Many people don't know if they're going to make it through life or not, but when you have life in Yahweh, then your story is recorded in the book of life. You will always be given life, which is actually interesting because it leads us to the prophets portion, which is found in 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 1 through 31. And this is talking about David. And the Bible says that he was old. He was in the last days of his life. And at one point in verse 31, now the story is talking about David being old, and one of his sons appointed himself king, while being there. And Bathsheba, his wife, David's wife, comes to him and says, hey, you promised that our son Solomon would rule after you. And so David makes his declaration that Solomon would be king. Of course, he had to go through the coronation and then take the throne. But in verse 31, it says that Bathsheba bowed before the king and said, long live the king. Of course, that is not the same as what's found in Genesis, but that word live means to make whole, to renew one's life, renew one's strength. But yet, at the same moment, it's related to the life of Sarah. Why do I say that? Because, again, his life was recorded and his life was given to by God. And all the mistakes that David made, God forgave him. David had repented. God forgave him. He had anointed and appointed him, raised him up. David did his will. And even though he had done some things incorrectly, he still was allowed to live. God again breathed life into David. This is something that I look at personally because despite all the mistakes I may have made over my life, and I have, God still has given me and allowed me life to live. He breathed his ruach in me, even though I can say that I am not worthy. And yet, Yah still breathed life. This leads me into the New Testament portion, John chapter 4, verses 3 through 14. Very famous story of Yeshua sitting at the well, and he meets a Samaritan woman at the well. And he asks her to give him to drink. And she says, well, you have nothing to draw from. And he said, had you known who said, give me to drink, you would have asked for the water that he would give so that you would never thirst again. Of course, she says, well, give me some of that water. And he says, go call your husband. And she says, I have no husband. And of course, Yeshua knows all things and says, you said truly because you have had 5. And the one that you have right now is not even yours. And then the woman says, of course, you must be a prophet. You are the Messiah. And she goes and tells the town people that come see a man who told me everything that I've ever done. Surely he must be the Messiah that we've been waiting for. Here you can see that Yeshua offers her life. Again, life. Not just physical life. It's not what we're talking about, because as you can see, Sarah died and her life was celebrated. David died. His life was celebrated. Abraham died in the Torah portion. His life is celebrated. And here in the Brit Kadashad, Yeshua is offering life. This is something that, again, we should remember, as the scriptures says, choose ye this day whom you shall serve. Choose life or choose death. I choose life. God in his great mercy, and again it's shown with Yeshua sitting at the well talking to the Samaritan woman, a person who none of Israel would have dared gone to beforehand. And yet Yeshua saw value in her and said, I offer you life. This is the same thing that he's offered to every single one of us. Not one person probably would have touched us, knowing the lives that we may have led. Some of us may have led a life. You may have been born saved, born in church. I was born in church, all my life. And yet, I can say with a certainty that I am not worthy. And yet, Yahweh still has offered me life. It's out of his abundance of grace and mercy that he does so, which is why I choose life. The Bible says it is appointed once for man to die. But if you have life, then that one-time physical death will always still mean an eternity with him. Choose life. Let your life be written in the Lamb's book of life. Choose Yeshua. Choose life. Shabbat Shalom. God bless.